You become aware of the cold before anything else, a dry, earthy cold that has settled into the cottage walls overnight and now presses against your face where it lies above the blanket. The air tastes of wood smoke so old it has lost its sting, replaced by a faint mineral flatness, and beneath that, the clean scent of the water reeds stacked in the shed outside. A smell that has worked its way into every woolen thread of the bedding. The room is dark, but not entirely so. A single rushlight on the mantel shelf gutters with a flame no bigger than a thumbnail, casting a trembling orange smear across the ceiling beams and deepening the shadows in the corners. No wind rattles the shutters, no bird calls. The February morning waits in absolute stillness, as if the whole village is holding its breath. The master thatcher is already up. You hear him before you see him. The soft clink of the iron poker against the hearthstones, then the whisper of ash falling through the grate. He does not speak, and neither do you. The hour before dawn in this cottage belongs to a pact of silence observed since your first day as apprentice. You push back the blanket, and the cold wraps around your shoulders with an immediate, patient grip. The floorboards, wide and dark with age, feel like frozen earth through your stockinged feet as you cross to the washstand, where a pitcher of water has grown a thin skin of ice that cracks when you dip in a cupped hand. The shock of it on your face tightens the skin and clears the last threads of sleep, leaving only the quiet certainty of the day ahead. You dress in the order you always dress, a sequence that needs no thought. First, the long woolen hose, pulled up over the knee and tied with a strip of linen tape that has been washed so many times it is soft as a petal. Then the padded jerkin of unbleached wool, heavy and smelling of lanolin, its wooden toggles slipping through their loops with a dull friction. Over that goes a leather waistcoat, stiff from damp and scuffed to a pale brown at the seams. The thick boots come last, their soles caked with yesterday's clay, now dried to a grey crust that powders onto the floor as you work your heels in. Each movement is slow, not because you are tired, but because hurry has no place here. The clothes accept your body, the cold accepts the clothes, and time moves at the pace of the embers settling in the hearth. The thatcher, a lean man whose age is written more in the quiet of his hands than in his face, kneels by the fire with a patience that makes the flames seem to rise at his command. He has placed the iron pot on its trivet, and already a thin steam begins to curl from the spout, carrying the nutty scent of oat gruel into the room. You watch him add a pinch of salt from a small wooden box, his fingers moving with the precision of habit, and then he glances towards the shuttered window, as if reading the light through the cracks, though there is no light yet. Only a softening of the blackness into something faintly grey. A low murmur crosses his lips, something about the tide and the mist and the state of the stave, but it is not directed at you. It is the sound of a man arranging his thoughts, as much a part of the room as the ticking of the cooling embers. You fold the empty reed sack on the bench, a length of coarse hessian that smells of the marsh even when dry, its fibers catching on the rough skin of your palms. Beside it you lay the cutting hook, a sickle with a short ash handle worn smooth by many seasons of gripping and a curved blade that you check with a careful thumb for any nick or dulling. The blade is cold, and the cold transfers to your fingertip without sensation at first, then as a sharp, clean bite that tells you it is ready. The thatcher has his own sickle, longer in the handle and darker with age, and he wraps it in sacking without ceremony before setting it by the door. Into a leather bottle you pour the last of the small beer from a brown jug, a liquid so dark it is almost black and so mildly sour that it quenches thirst not with sweetness, but with a dry quenching patience. The stopper is whittled from a piece of willow, and you push it home with a soft, satisfying pop. Now there is a pause, the sort of pause that belongs to winter mornings when every task is done, and yet the sky still refuses to brighten. You sit on a low stool by the fire and eat the gruel from a wooden bowl that has been scraped smooth over decades, the spoon a simple horn curve that fits the hollow of your palm. The gruel is thick and hot, and it settles in your stomach with the weight of a promise, spreading a circle of warmth that the cottage air will slowly steal back as the day goes on. The thatcher eats standing, his bowl held close to his chin, his gaze resting on the shuttered window as though it might open at any moment. Between mouthfuls, he runs a hand over his jaw, the only sign of a night not yet fully left behind. The rushlight burns down to a stub, and when it finally drowns in its own wax, the darkness that follows is not complete, but graded. A charcoal wash that reveals the outline of the table, the hanging bunches of dried herbs, the shelf with its 3 pewter plates. Your eyes have grown used to dimness, and you can see the thatcher take his heavy fustian coat from its peg, the fabric so stiff with wear that it holds the shape of his shoulders even when empty. You pull on your own outer wrap, a hooded mantle of thick, undyed wool that smells of peat smoke and sheep, and the hood frames your face in a way that makes the world seem smaller, closer, more intimate. The cottage timbers creak softly, a sound as regular as breathing, caused not by footfalls, but by the slow contraction of wood in the cold, and you know that the building itself is settling into another day of bearing its own weight. The thatcher opens the door, and the mist enters before you do, rolling in across the threshold like a slow wave of vapor. It carries the scent of wet soil, rotting sedge, and the faint tang of the distant sea, all mixed into one cool breath that fills your lungs and makes the cottage behind you seem instantly enclosed, a box of warmth already receding into memory. You step outside and the February dark presses against your face with a moisture so fine it feels like the memory of rain. The village is a collection of sleeping shapes, the low roof lines of cottages, the humped silhouette of the hay barn, the bare fingers of an elm tree half dissolved in fog. Nothing moves except the mist itself, sliding in slow eddies around the corner of the garden wall. The mud track beneath your boots is soft but not yet slippery, the frost having drawn the moisture to the surface where it glazes the puddles with a milky skin that cracks under your weight with a sound less like breaking and more like a whispered yes. You walk behind the thatcher down the track, your breath a soft plume that merges with the mist so quickly you cannot tell where you end, and the air begins. The basket strap digs a familiar groove into your shoulder, and the Hessian roll of tools shifts against your back with each step. Past the first cottage, its shutters still closed, a tendril of smoke rising from its chimney is the only sign of life. A grey thread unwinding into the grey sky with infinite slowness. A hawthorn hedge stands bare and knotted, each twig beaded with droplets that catch the faintest diffusion of unseen dawn and hold it like tiny pearls. A robin sits deep within the hedge, feathers puffed into a perfect sphere, and it watches you pass without alarm, without song, its black eye reflecting the mist and nothing else. The lane curves gently, and for a moment you lose sight of the thatcher's back, his dark coat melting into the fog until he is just a shape, a suggestion of movement. Then the track straightens and you see him again, the same steady pace, the same slight stoop of a man who has carried reed bundles since boyhood. The mud ruts are deep here, left by the last cart to haul peak before the thaw, and you step carefully around them, your boots finding the higher ground by instinct. Water drips from the eaves of a deserted byre, each droplet a distinct plink in the silence, a tiny clock counting out the minutes until daylight. The sound is so regular, so unhurried, that it becomes part of the day's rhythm, like the beat of the thatcher's feet ahead of you, or the slow swing of your own arms. You pass the village well, a ring of mossy stone with a wooden cover, and beyond it, the ground begins to slope towards the marsh. Here the smell changes, the wood smoke and dry thatch giving way to a richer, greener dampness, the scent of water that has been standing in reed beds for centuries. The mist thickens, closing visibility to the length of a punt, and the world shrinks to a small circle of track and verge, and your own 2 boots moving in tandem. The thatcher pauses at a stile, not to rest, but to listen, his head tilted slightly, as though the marsh is speaking in a language too low for you to catch. After a moment he nods, satisfied, and continues, and you follow without question, because the marsh is his book, and you are still learning to read. The light begins to change, not brightening exactly, but losing its charcoal density, shifting towards a pearl grey that makes the mist luminous from within. You can see your own hands now, the pale skin of your knuckles, the dark rim of dirt under each nail from yesterday's binding work. The world is waking not with a shout, but with a slow, even inhalation, and you are part of that inhalation, a small figure walking a familiar lane towards a familiar boat on a morning that has happened 1,000 times before and will happen again, quiet and cold and complete. The cottage, the gruel, the hearth, all are behind you now. Ahead lies the Staithe and the water and the long day's cutting. But for this moment there is only the walk, the weight of the tools, and the steady, boring, perfect rhythm of a February morning in 1650, asking nothing of you but your presence and your patience. The lane beyond the stile unrolls in a gradual descent, hardly steep enough to notice unless you are carrying a load, and the footing changes beneath your boots from the firm packed clay of the village track to a softer, darker earth that holds the memory of the marsh even here, half a mile from the open water. The mist, which had thinned to a luminous pearl over the fields, closes again as the ground sinks, gathering in the hollows like a second soil, so that you walk through layers of grey that shift and part and reform without sound. The thatcher moves ahead of you, his shape now a dark smudge, now a clear silhouette as the vapour eddies, and his pace remains exactly the same as it was when you stepped out of the cottage, a steady, unhurried stride that seems not to belong to a man so much as to the morning itself. Your own legs follow in that rhythm, and the basket straps creak against your shoulder becomes a part of the quiet, a single note repeated without variation. The hedgerow to your left is old, a tangle of hawthorn and hazel and the bare grey stems of dogwood, all woven together by winters of frost and pruning, and through the gaps you glimpse the flat fields beyond, their furrows filled with mist as though the earth has been flooded with a weightless, silent water. Nothing moves in those fields. The sheep are still folded on higher ground, and the plough will not be yoked for weeks yet. You smell the cold, clean scent of damp bark and the faint sweetness of rotting leaves that have lain in the ditch since October, their edges now soft as felt. A single crow somewhere behind you calls once, a cracked note that hangs in the air for a long moment and then sinks back into the stillness, leaving no echo, as if the fog has swallowed it whole. Your hands, hanging at your sides, brush against the wool of your mantle, and the sensation is a dull constant, a boundary between your body and the world that is neither warm nor cold, but simply present, like the weight of the sickle that knocks gently against your thigh with each step, wrapped in its sacking. You do not think about the cutting that will come. You do not think about the boat or the water or the reed. The walk has its own gentle claim on your attention, the slow procession of familiar landmarks appearing out of the mist, like old friends who do not require a greeting. There is the split oak at the field edge, its bark a deep furrowed black, its one low branch worn smooth by 100 years of hands and beasts rubbing against it. There is the stone waymarker, no taller than your knee, its carved lettering long since softened to illegibility by rain, but you know it marks the parish boundary, and nothing more important than that. The thatcher passes it without a glance. He has known this lane since before you were born, and the stone is as much a part of his route as the air. The lane narrows now, pinched between two banks that lift the hedgerows to the height of your shoulders, and the mud deepens, taking on a glossy sheen where the frost has melted back into liquid. Your boots leave a trail of prints that slowly fill with water, each one a tiny pool that mirrors the grey sky for a second before clouding over with silt. The sound of your footsteps changes here, becoming a soft, wet sucking that marks the gradual saturation of the earth, a reminder that all this land was once open water, and still is, just beneath the grass. The thatcher skirts the worst patch, stepping onto a narrow verge of flattened reeds laid down as a causeway, and you follow, feeling the give of the vegetation underfoot, the slight bounce of centuries of accumulated peat fibre cushioning your weight. This is the old way, the way the reed cutters have come for generations, and though it is not marked on any map, you could find it in the dark by the feel alone. A pause comes without preamble, the thatcher stopping to adjust the sacking around his sickle, and while he does so, you stand and listen to the silence, which is not empty, but full of small, nearly imperceptible sounds, the drip of moisture from a twig, the faint rustle of a field mouse in the ditch, your own heartbeat muffled by the layers of wool and leather. The mist on your face is gentle, a cool film that settles on your eyebrows and the fine hairs of your cheeks without ever becoming a droplet, and you blink slowly against it, tasting the clean, slightly metallic tang that the air carries. The thatcher finishes his adjusting and moves on, and you fall into step again behind him, noting how his shoulders, even under the heavy fustian, seem to lean slightly forward, as if the lane itself is pulling him towards the water. You cross a small planked bridge, hardly wider than your 2 feet together, over a ditch whose black water is visible only as a faint sheen of movement below the mist line, a current so slow it could be a trick of the eye. The boards are slick, with damp and worn concave in the middle, and you tread carefully, one hand out for balance. Though you have crossed this bridge so many times, your body knows the exact placement of each foot before your mind does. On the far side, the lane opens briefly into a small clearing where a shepherd's hut squats under a huge old willow, its thatch patched and repatched until it looks like a map of a dozen different seasons. No smoke rises from its chimney, and the door is barred from the outside, but the presence of the place is companionable, a sign that you are not the first to walk this way, nor the last. The thatcher nods towards the hut, a tiny motion of his chin, and you understand it as a recognition, nothing more. Now the ground tremors up imperceptibly, the lane lifting onto a low ridge that runs like a spine towards the river, and here the mist thins again, enough that you can see a wider circle of country, a dark smudge of alder carr to the north, a line of reed beds to the south, and ahead the hint of open water, a mere paleness that might be the Broad or might be a trick of the light. The sky above is still uniform grey, without any break or variation, a lid of cloud that seals the day into a dim, even twilight from which the sun never emerges. It is as if the morning has decided to remain morning forever, suspending you in a cool, perpetual beginning. You feel no urgency about this. The day will unfold as it unfolds, and the reed will be cut whether you reach the staith at first light or an hour later, because the reed does not care, and the water does not care, and the thatcher ahead of you cares only that the work is done well, not quickly. Your body has warmed with the walking, not to the point of sweat, but to a comfortable working temperature that makes the cold an abstract thing, a condition outside your clothes rather than inside your skin. You flex your fingers inside your gloves, feeling the slight stiffness there, and then relax them again. The basket strap has settled into a groove on your shoulder, and you adjust it without thinking, lifting it a fraction and letting it fall back. A motion as automatic as breathing. Ahead, the thatcher begins to hum. Just a few low notes, nothing like a tune, more like the continuation of the marsh sounds themselves, a human drone that blends with the trickle of water and the distant call of a coot. You do not join in. Your role is to listen and to walk, and that is enough. The lane begins to bear more signs of the water's nearness. Puddles appear more frequently, each one carrying a faint iridescent film, and the vegetation on the banks changes to reed, canary grass, and soft rush, their stems pale and dead from winter, but still standing thickly. You smell the marsh now unmistakably, a scent that is both clean and fertile, like black mud and green shoots, and the cold breath of a well. The thatcher slows his pace, and you realize you have reached the final bend before the staith, where the track drops sharply down a short, root-ribbed slope to the landing. He pauses at the top, turning his head to look back at you, and his face in the diffuse light is calm, creased with age, but not with weariness. His eyes the color of the water you will soon be floating on. He says nothing, but the look says nearly there, and then he begins the descent, his boots finding the worn steps that have been cut into the bank over years of use. You follow, feeling the pull of the slope in your thighs, a slight burn that is pleasant in its mildness, and with each step the mist grows thinner and the world opens out. The sound of water lapping against wood reaches you, a quiet lap, 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 that has been going on since long before you arrived and will continue long after you leave. A dilapidated wooden post stands at the foot of the slope, its top carved into a crude bird shape that no longer resembles any living creature, and you touch it for luck, a habit you picked up from the thatcher and have never questioned. Then the ground levels, and you are at the stave, a simple platform of blackened planks extending out over a narrow cut of water, so still it mirrors the grey sky with perfect fidelity, broken only by the small ripples that spread from the post you just touched. The punt waits, tied by a single rope to an iron ring, its dark sides beaded with condensation, and in the well of the boat a few dead leaves have settled, blown there by some forgotten wind. The quant pole lies along the gunwale, a length of ash worn smooth by the sliding of hands, its brass ferrule at the bottom, green with verdigris. The thatcher steps down into the boat with the ease of a man stepping onto dry land, and the punt rocks, once, twice, then settles, accepting his weight as the water accepts the hull. He looks at you and gestures, a small lift of his fingers, and you hand him the basket, then the sacking of tools, then you step in yourself, feeling the uncertain sway that always comes before you find your balance, the moment when your body remembers the difference between earth and water. You kneel on the folded sack in the bow, and the cold dampness of it seeps through your woolen hose almost at once. But you do not mind it. It is part of the day, as much as the mist and the grey light and the steady, calm presence of the thatcher untying the rope and pushing off from the staith with the pole. His movement a single fluid arc that sends the punt gliding into the channel without a sound. The journey down the track is over, and the water journey begins, but there is no break between them, only the soft continuation of a morning that still holds you in its patient, boring grip. The punt is a patient thing, black-tarred and low in the water, its flat bottom resting so calmly on the cut that it might be a part of the staith itself, a piece of the landing that has learned to float. The mist hangs just above the surface, dense enough that the far bank is only a soft grey suggestion, and the vessel waits within that vapour as though it has been there since the world was made, waiting for you. Its sides are rough under your hand when you steady yourself, the tar slightly tacky in places where the cold has not yet hardened it fully, and the smell of it is a dark, smoky scent that mingles with the marsh air. Along the gunwale, the wood is warm smooth by the rubbing of ropes and the sliding of reed bundles over many seasons, and a few strands of old reed, golden and frayed, still cling to the inner planking as if reluctant to leave the boat they once rode in. The thatcher reaches down and takes the basket from you, stowing it amidships next to a coil of warm hemp rope and a small wooden bailer shaped like a shoe. Then he holds out his hand not to help you, but to guide the sacking-wrapped tools, and you pass them across one by one, the sickles heavy and awkward, clanking softly against the thwart. The boat accepts everything with a slight, slow tilt, a gentle adjustment that ripples outward from the hull in a single spreading ring, and then it settles again, as forgiving as a bed of dry reeds. When the thatcher nods, you step in, placing your foot exactly where the planking is reinforced by an extra rib, a spot you have learned by feel, and the punt rocks only once. A low, lazy roll from side to side that speaks of water rather than danger. The cold comes up through the boards immediately, a steady, insistent presence that finds the soles of your boots and reminds you that beneath this little wooden floor is depth and darkness, and the slow, silent currents of the fen. You kneel on the folded sack in the bow, arranging your legs so your knees press into the hessian, and your weight is low and centered, exactly as the master showed you on your first day. The fabric of the sack is rough against your wool hose, already carrying the damp of the morning, and that damp will grow as the hours pass, a gradual seep that you have come to accept as inevitable, even welcome. A measure of the day's progress. The thatcher stands at the stern with one hand on the quant pole and the other on the rope that binds the punt to the iron ring, and for a long moment he does nothing, only scans the mist as though reading a page of water and sky that tells him everything he needs to know about the hours ahead. His stillness is the stillness of deep knowledge, a patience that has no need to hurry, and you share it without words, kneeling in the bow and waiting, your breath a pale wisp that drifts back towards him and dissolves. The knot comes loose with a single tug, the rope sliding through the ring with a wet, whispering sound, and the punt is free. The thatcher places the tip of the quant pole against the staith's edge and pushes, a smooth, unhurried motion that sends the boat gliding backwards into the channel, and in that moment the shore becomes memory, the solid planking of the landing retreating into the mist until it is no more than a darker patch of grey, then nothing at all. Now there is only water around you, water the colour of strong tea, tannin-stained from the peat beds it is filtered through, water so still that when you look down you see your own reflection as a vague, dark shape, kneeling on a vague, dark boat, a ghost of yourself that trembles slightly with the boat's smallest movement and then clears again. The surface holds the mist like a lid, and when a droplet of condensed vapour falls from the pole, the rings it makes are the only sign that this is liquid and not solid, a quiet, spreading geometry that reaches the banks and fades. The quant pole is a length of straight-grained ash, pale where the bark was once stripped, now darkened by the oils of countless hands to a deep, mellow brown. Its lower end is capped with a brass ferrule that has gone green with age, and as the thatcher lowers it into the water, you hear the first of many sounds that will accompany you through the day. A low, muffled thunk as the brass meets the mud on the bottom, A pause as he leans his weight into the push, then the trickle and drip of water, lifting free as the pole comes up hand over hand. Each repetition is identical yet distinct, varying only in the depth of the mud or the angle of the stroke, and the rhythm of it is a clock without a face, marking nothing but the slow progress of the boat along the cut. You feel the punt respond to each push, a subtle surge forward that presses your knees a little harder into the sack, then a glide as the pole lifts and the boat coasts, then the thunk again, and again, and again. The banks on either side are fringed with rushes and sedge, their winter-killed stems standing stiff and ghostly, beaded with moisture that catches what little light exists and holds it in tiny silver points. The stems are pale brown and grey, a palette of soft muted colors that blend into the mist so well you can only tell where the vegetation ends and the air begins by the slight change in texture, the fine vertical lines of the plants against the formless horizontal of the fog. Occasionally, a thicker clump of reed mace rises, its old seed heads now ragged and empty, dark brown cylinders that have burst open over the winter and lost their fluff to the winds, and they bow slightly as the boat passes, as if nodding in slow greeting. Nothing is green yet. Spring is still a rumor far to the south, and the world here is a world of resting things, dormant roots and frozen buds, and the quiet, patient breath of the fen. The cold dampness seeps deeper into your knees as the journey continues, a steady, gradual soaking that you register as a dull ache, not painful, but present, a companion to the other sensations of the morning. Your woolen hose, thick as they are, cannot keep out the moisture forever, and the damp works its way through the fibers in a slow, capillary creep that you can almost chart if you pay attention, starting at the kneecap and spreading outward in a circle of chill. But the rest of your body remains warm, the walking having banked a store of heat in your muscles that the layers of wool and leather now guard, and the contrast between the warm core and the cold knees is not unpleasant, a reminder of the body's ability to endure, to adapt, to continue. You shift your weight slightly, easing the pressure on one knee and then the other, and the boat rocks a tiny bit in response, a sway that the thatcher at the stern does not even notice. So attuned is he to the punt's every motion. The mist wraps the boat completely now, so that you can see no more than a dozen feet in any direction, a small moving bubble of visibility that encloses you and the thatcher and the pile tools in a private world. The vapor touches your face with a cool, impersonal gentleness, condensing on your eyebrows and the sparse hairs of your upper lip. And when you breathe in, the air tastes of water and peat and something faintly metallic, like the tang of a clean stone. It is a taste that has no equivalent on land, a taste that belongs only to the open Broad and the narrow cuts that lead to it, and you have come to associate it with the beginning of the real work, the moment when the land falls away and the reed beds begin. The thatcher, you know, could find his way through this fog even if he were blindfolded, navigating by the subtle currents and the texture of the mud under his pole, by the particular shape of each bend in the channel, by a map that exists nowhere but in his own long memory. A small sound reaches you from somewhere in the reeds, a low gurgling bubble that might be a moorhen shifting on its hidden nest, or might be nothing more than the marsh releasing a pocket of gas from the deep peat, a tiny, ancient exhalation. You turn your head towards the sound, but the reeds offer no movement, no glimpse of life, only the same still grey curtain of stems and fog. The thatcher does not react. He has heard such sounds 10,000 times, and they are no more remarkable to him than the splash of the pole. Your own attention drifts back to the boat, to the small details that you have learned to notice during these long approaches, the way a single drop of water hangs from the tip of a rush stem, swelling until it falls with a plink that sends out a tiny ring, the way the tar on the gunwale has cracked in a pattern like a map of an unknown country, the way a single spent reed leaf, brown and curled, floats past the hull with the slow dignity of a miniature boat on its own journey. The thatcher adjusts his stance, shifting the pole to the other side of the stern, and the punt responds by angling slightly, following the unseen curve of the channel. You know this bend without seeing it, because your body has learned to anticipate the slight lean of the boat as it rounds the corner, the way the pole pushes harder on one side and then the other. This is the unspoken understanding between apprentice and master, a language of weight and motion and quiet attention that requires no words. The thatcher does not tell you where you are. He knows that you know that after these months of mornings you have absorbed the shape of the cut into your bones, and that is enough for him. He poles on, and you kneel on, and the boat moves forward through the mist, as inevitably as the hour hand of a clock. The light shifts almost imperceptibly, the grey brightening from a deep charcoal tone to something closer to pearl, and you understand that somewhere above the cloud the sun is climbing, though you will not see it today. The mist takes on a faint, diffuse luminescence, not brighter exactly, but less dense, as if the particles of water are spreading out, making room for the day to arrive. Visibility extends to 20 feet now, then 30, and you can see the next bend in the cut before you reach it, a dark line of water curving away between the reed beds. The thatcher's pace does not change. He pushes and lifts, his breathing slow and even, his eyes fixed on the water ahead with an attention that is not tense but open, receptive, the gaze of a man who expects nothing more than what the marsh gives him. The cut widens, the banks pulling back, and you sense the open broad approaching, a feeling that comes not through sight, but through the changed acoustics, the way the small sounds of the boat suddenly spread out and lose their echoes, as if the world has taken a deep breath and expanded. The rush is thin, replaced by open water on either side, and the mist here is different, lying in low banks that drift across the surface like slow herds of cloud. The thatcher stops poling for a moment and lets the punt drift, and you feel the boat lose its forward momentum, settling into a gentle, aimless rocking that is the water's own motion, the slow breathing of a great, shallow lake. He stands there, the pole resting across his shoulder, and looks out at the reed beds that fringe the broad, dense stands of phragmites whose tall golden stems rise out of the water in dense formation, their feathery plumes motionless and heavy with moisture. Then he nods, a small private gesture, and turns the pole to steer the punt towards a narrow opening in the reeds, a hidden channel that leads to the heart of the harvest. You grip the gunwale lightly, adjusting your balance for the turn, and the punt slides into the reeds with a soft shushing sound, the stems brushing against the hull like 1,000 quiet hands, welcoming you in. The punt drifts out of the narrow channel and onto the broad itself, and the change is not so much a movement as a release, the reeds falling away on either side to leave only open water, an open mist, and the immense quiet of a world that has forgotten time. The broad lies under the February vapor like a lake of pewter, its surface so still and heavy that the mist above it seems to be the same substance, a continuation of the water into sky, so that you can no longer tell where the one ends and the other begins. The horizon is gone, the far trees and the farther reed beds are all swallowed in grey, and the boat sits at the exact center of a circle of visibility that moves with you, a private world of water, perhaps 100 feet across, beyond which nothing exists but the patient, silent fog. The sensation is of being suspended, held in a space without edges, a place that is not a place but simply a condition of dampness and stillness, and the cold, slow breathing of the fen. The thatcher stops poling. He lifts the quant pole out of the water and lays it along the gunwale with a soft, wet clatter, and the punt, freed from its forward push, settles into a gentle drift that is less a motion than a tendency, a slow, aimless turning that follows the hidden currents too subtle to feel. You remain kneeling in the bow, your hams resting on the gunwale, and you feel the boat rotate beneath you, a lazy spin that brings first the open water, then the distant smudge of a reed island, then the pale nothing of the mist into your field of view, over and over, as though the broad is showing you all its faces one by one. The thatcher stands in the stern with his arms folded, his gaze sweeping across the reed edges that fringe the water, and you know that he is reading the marsh, reading the colour and the thickness of the phragmites, stands, reading the way the plumes bend under their own weight, reading the subtle differences that tell him where the best cutting lies. He does not speak, his eyes move slowly, and the punt turns, and the mist drifts, and the minutes pass without any mark. The water around the boat is the colour of strong tea, a deep transparent amber that lets you see down into it for a foot or more before the tannin stain darkens to black. Small particles of peat, fine as dust, hang suspended in it, not sinking, not rising, just existing in a state of perfect equilibrium. And when you look straight down over the side, you can see the pale, wavering shape of your own face looking back, a mirror that is softer than glass and more forgiving, blurring your features into something ancient and anonymous. A single tiny water beetle, black and glossy as a polished seed, rows itself across the surface, with legs too small to see, leaving behind a faint V-quake that spreads and fades and is gone. The insect moves without purpose, and you watch it until it disappears under a floating reed stem, and then you are looking at nothing again, just the endless, patient water. The phragmites, the common water reed, rise all around the margins of the Broad in dense stands. Their stems are pale gold that shades to brown at the base, as if they have been dipped in shadow. Each stem is perfectly straight, segmented at intervals by the papery remains of old leaf sheaths, and at the top, the feathery plume, the panicle, fans out in a soft, drooping spray, the color of old honey. The plumes are motionless now, heavy with the condensed mist, but even when the wind blows they only sway slowly, making a soft, dry rustling that is less a sound than a texture added to the silence. This year's dead growth, the thatcher explained to you on your first day, is the only reed worth cutting. The old grey stems have weathered too long and turned brittle, while the green ones are still full of sap and will rot on the roof. You look at the phragmites now and you can see the difference. The way the good reed stands taller and more golden, its stems straight and true, while the older growth leans and crumbles, its plumes already tattered by the winter gales. The thatcher is looking for the youngest of the dead stems, the ones cured by frost in January, and you know that when he finds them, he will point, and the day's work will begin. But for now, there is only the waiting, the slow scanning, and the quiet of the Broad. The mist moves across the water in long, slow banks, like islands of cloud that have settled onto the surface for a rest. One bank drifts past the punt, and for a moment the world goes white around you, the visibility shrinking to the length of your arm, the thatcher at the stern becoming a ghost, a dark shape that might be a man or might be a memory. Your breath in this enclosed space is loud, the only sound a soft rhythmic whisper that seems to belong to the fog itself. Then the bank passes and the world opens again, the water reappearing with its perfect mirror stillness, the reed beds returning as pale gold walls against the grey. The mist never stays the same for long. It thickens and thins, opens and closes like a slow door swinging on the hinges of the air, and each time the Broad rearranges itself around you, a new composition of water and reed and vapour, never the same twice. The cold on the open water is different from the cold on the land. It is a wetter cold, a cold that comes up through the boards of the punt and down from the mist simultaneously, wrapping your body in a uniform chill that seems to have no direction. Your face is damp, and when you rub a hand across your cheek, you feel the fine, almost invisible droplets that have settled there. A dew of your own making. The wool of your hood has begun to felt together where the moisture has soaked into it, and it hangs heavier on your head, pressing your hair flat against your skull. Your knees, still pressed into the folded sack, are numb now. Not painfully numb, but distantly, as though they belong to someone else, someone kneeling on a different boat in a different Broad, a long way off. You could shift your position. You could sit up on the thwart and let your legs dangle, but you do not, because kneeling keeps you low and stable, and because changing anything would break the spell of the drift, the quiet, attentive idleness that has settled over the punt like a blanket. A sound rises from somewhere across the water, thin and far away, the call of a reed bunting, a short, unmusical note that is more like a stone tapping against a stone than a bird's song. It comes 3 times, with long pauses between each call, and then silence returns, deeper than before. The thatcher turns his head slightly towards the sound, but his expression does not change. He has heard reed buntings every day of his working life, and the bird is no more remarkable to him than the water or the sky. Yet the call has placed something in the landscape. It has told you that there is another side to the Broad, somewhere out in the mist, a place where a small brown bird is sitting on a reed stem, fluffing its feathers against the cold. You try to picture it, and the picture is a soft one, blurred by fog, without edges or colors, just a shape and a sound and the knowledge that you are not alone out here, even if the company is only a distant bird. The thatcher lifts his hand and points, not with a finger but with his whole hand. A slow, open gesture towards a patch of reed that stands slightly apart from the main bed. A small island of phragmites growing on a submerged hummock of peat. The reed there is thick and golden, the stems as straight as poles, and the plumes are full and unbroken, the sign of a stand that has not been battered by wind or nibbled by waterfowl. You follow his gaze and you see it too, and the seeing is a quiet satisfaction, a settling of the mind onto a definite object after the long, formless drift. The thatcher picks up the quant pole, not to pull but to steer, dipping it into the water like a rudder and pushing against the current just enough to angle the punt towards the island. The boat responds with its characteristic slow, lazy grace, the bow swinging around until it points directly at the reed patch, and then you are gliding in, the water hissing softly against the hull. As you approach, the reeds rise higher, their bases disappearing into the dark water while their tops tower over the punt, 10 feet tall or more, curving inward slightly to form a loose ceiling of feathered plumes. The light under the reeds is dimmer, a greenish-grey twilight that filters through the stems in soft, vertical bars, and the air here is stiller than the open Broad, trapped and held by the density of the growth. You can smell the reeds now, a dry, papery scent that is almost like old hay, but sharper, with an undertone of the wet mud from which they grow. The thatcher reaches out and grasps a stem, bending it towards him and inspecting it closely, running his thumb down its length and feeling for any weakness or rot. He nods, a small, private nod, and then he turns to you and gestures to the tools, and the waiting is over. But the Broad, the mist, the slow drift, they stay with you, a quiet undertone beneath the work that will follow, the memory of a morning that held you in its grey, patient hands and asked nothing but your stillness. The thatcher turns from his inspection of the reed and reaches into the sacking that holds the tools, drawing out the sickle with a slow, unhurried motion that makes the blade catch the grey light for just a moment, a brief, cool flash before it settles into his grip. He holds it out to you, not as a gift, but as a lesson, the handle towards your hand, and when you take it, the ash wood is cold and smooth, worn into a shallow groove where his thumb has rested for so many seasons that the wood has permanently changed shape. You close your fingers around it and feel the weight, which is slight, balanced forward in the curve of the blade, and the handle fits your palm as though it has been waiting there all morning. The thatcher says nothing. He simply looks at your grip and then he takes his own sickle from the sacking, a longer, darker tool with a handle polished to a deep honey brown, and he turns towards the wall of reed that rises beside the punt. He shows you first, and you watch with the attention that comes from knowing that words will not be given twice. He stands with one foot braced against the inner rib of the punt, his left arm extended towards the reeds, and his body settles into a slight forward lean that seems to belong to the act of cutting as much as the blade itself. The sickle moves in a low, smooth arc, starting from his right hip and sweeping outward, and the blade meets the stems perhaps 6 inches above the water, where the reed is firm and golden and free of the darker soaped portion that sits in the marsh. There is no force behind the stroke, no chopping or hacking, only a clean, quiet slice that severs a clump of stems with a single soft crunch that is more felt than heard. The cut reeds do not fall. They remain upright, held by their neighbours, and the thatcher reaches out with his left hand and gathers them into a sheaf under his arm, pulling them gently sideways until they come free with a faint, rustling sigh. Then he cuts again, a second sweep, a second gathering, the motion flowing from one to the next without any seam, a rhythm as steady as a pendulum swinging in a long case clock. You watch his wrist, how it stays locked, how the power comes from the shoulder, how the blade's curve does the work rather than the muscle, and you file these observations away in the part of your mind that learns through watching, the same part that learned to kneel in the punt and to read the mist. He gathers 4 cuts into a single sheaf, the bundle growing thick under his arm, the stems lined up roughly at the base where the sickle passed through them, their feathery heads trailing behind like a golden broom. Then he turns and lays the sheaf across the 2 forked sticks that he has already set into the punt's side, a simple resting pole that keeps the cut reed out of the bilge water, and the bundle settles with a soft, dry thud that is one of the sounds you will hear 100 times today. He turns back to the reed bed without pausing, his body already moving into the next cut, and the work continues, smooth and wordless, an exhibition of everything this day will be. Now he gestures to you with a tilt of his head, and you move to the opposite side of the punt, where the reed bed presses close and the water is shallow enough to show the dark peat bottom through the amber tea of the Broad. You grip the sickle as he showed you, the handle seated deep in your palm, with your thumb running along the flat, and you lean forward over the gunwale, feeling the punt tip slightly under your shifted weight. The first stem you choose stands alone, slightly apart from the thicker clump, and you position the blade against it just above the water, exactly as you were shown. Your first stroke is tentative, a little too short, and the blade skids across the hard outer surface of the reed without cutting through. The thatcher does not correct you and you try again, this time with a longer, smoother sweep that lets the curved edge do its work, and the stem parts with a faint crisp crunch that travels up through the handle and into your hand. A sensation so small and so specific that it feels like a word you've just learned. The reed tips and you catch it before it can fall into the water, pulling it towards you with your left hand and adding a second stem, then a third, gathering each cut into your arm until you have a modest sheaf that is thinner than the master's, but holds together. You lay it across the resting pole, and the thud it makes is your first contribution to the day's load, a quiet, unremarkable sound that no one else in the world will ever hear. The repetition begins then, and it is the repetition that will fill the next hours, not with monotony, but with a kind of gentle, absorbing rhythm that takes your mind and holds it in the present moment, where nothing exists except the reed and the sickle and the cold water and the slow accumulation of bundles. You cut, and the blade whispers through the stems with a sound that is half hiss and half crunch, a sound so soft that it barely carries beyond the punt. You gather the cut reed under your left arm, feeling the slight roughness of the stems against your sleeve, the way they press together and align themselves, the way a stray leaf sometimes catches on the wool and has to be plucked free. When the bundle grows too thick for your arm to hold comfortably, you lay it on the pole and it falls with a soft thump against the other sheaves already waiting there, adding its small weight to the boat's gradual sinking. Then you reach for the next stem and the next, and the world narrows to the span of your outstretched arms. The thatcher works opposite you, his back turned, his own sickle moving with a steadiness that you can hear without watching, a regular soft crunch and pause that sets the tempo for your own labor. He does not rush you. He does not slow for you either, but his pace is a generous one, a pace that a novice can match if he focuses and does not tire, and you find yourself slipping into synchrony with him after a while, your cuts falling on the offbeat so that the two sickles never sound at once, but in a gentle, alternating duet. The water drips from the lifted stems, 1,000 small trickles that plink into the Broad with a sound like distant tiny bells, and when a sheaf is laid down the hollow stems knock together with a dry woody clatter that is over almost before it begins. These are the only sounds, apart from the occasional murmur from the thatcher, a low there or a that is not instruction but acknowledgement, a quiet recognition that the work is proceeding as it should. Your hands grow chilled first, the cold creeping into your fingers through the grip of the sickle and the handling of the wet reeds. A damp, penetrating cold that seems to bypass the skin and settle directly into the joints. You feel it most in your knuckles, which begin to stiffen slightly, and in the tips of your fingers, which lose their fine sensitivity and become blunt, so that you must look at what you are doing rather than feel it. Then the chill deepens into numbness, a soft, cottony absence of sensation that is not uncomfortable, but strange, as though your hands had been wrapped in thick wool and are operating at a small remove from your body. You know that when the numbness comes, you must be more careful, because a numb hand can slip on the sickle or misjudge a stem. But the work is so slow and so repetitive that even with dulled fingers you can continue without error, the blade finding its path by muscle memory rather than touch. The smell of the fresh cut reed rises around you as the morning progresses, a clean green scent that is surprising in these dead winter stems, as if the sap has not quite retreated and still holds a memory of summer. It mixes with the wet, peaty smell of the Broad and the dark, tarry smell of the punt, and together they form a single complex aroma that you will always associate with this work, with these mornings, with the quiet, boring, essential task of gathering a roof from the water. When a reed splits or crushes under the blade instead of cutting cleanly, the scent sharpens for a moment, becoming almost sweet, and you toss the broken stem aside into the water, where it floats away with a slow, gentle drift, joining the other debris that litters the surface like a library of lost things. The thatcher pauses after a long while, straightening his back and resting his sickle on the gunwale while he looks out over the Broad. And in that pause you feel the ache in your own shoulders for the first time, a dull, spreading tiredness that has crept up without your noticing. You straighten too, and the change in posture sends a small cascade of sensation down your spine, not painful, but present, a reminder that your body has been bent in one position for longer than it usually is. The mist has thinned a little more, so that you can now see the far line of the reed bed, a pale gold wall that curves away into the distance, and the sky above has lightened from charcoal to a soft, even pearl that holds no promise of sun. The thatcher draws a slow breath and lets it out, a small cloud of vapor that hangs in the air for a moment before dispersing, and then he bends back to his work without a word, and you bend back to yours, the rhythm resuming as though it had never paused. The bundle pile grows steadily on the resting pole, a long, low stack of golden sheaves that stretches from amidships almost to the stern, and each new bundle you lay down raises the pile a little higher, a little closer to the gunwale. The weight of the reed begins to make itself felt, the punt riding lower in the water, with a deeper, more settled motion, the rocking less pronounced when you shift your weight. You take satisfaction from this, a quiet, unspoken satisfaction that has nothing to do with pride and everything to do with the visible accumulation of effort, the slow transformation of the standing reed into the laid sheaf, the wild into the useful. It is a satisfaction that the thatcher must feel too, though he shows it only in the calm, steady way he continues to cut, his own pile equally high and equally neat. The stems that you cut now are slightly thinner than the first ones, growing on the outer edge of the reed bed where the water is a little deeper and the peat a little less rich, but they are still good reed, straight and golden and cured by the frost. You adjust your cut slightly, bringing the sickle a little lower to catch the thicker base, and the blade finds its new path without difficulty. The thatcher notices this small adjustment and says nothing, but his silence is a kind of approval, a confirmation that you are learning the reed, reading its subtle variations without needing to be told. The quiet instruction of the morning has been nothing more than this, a tilt of the head, a murmured word, a pause that allows you to watch and absorb. There is no syllabus, no test, only the slow accumulation of days just like this one. Each layer of experience laid down like the sheaves on the pole. Your arms begin to tire after another long stretch of cutting, a low, warm burn in the forearm that comes from gripping the sickle and holding the sheaves, but it is a tiredness that you can work through, a tiredness that will build slowly over the rest of the day and then release in the evening by the hearth. You switch hands without thinking, passing the sickle to your left and reaching with your right, and though the left is slower and less certain, it gives the right a rest, and the work continues. The thatcher glances over and sees the switch, and for the first time in hours there is a tiny flicker at the corner of his mouth, a fractional movement that might be a smile or might be the play of shadow, and then it is gone. And he is cutting again, and you are cutting again, and the Broad lies quiet around you. The time passes without measure, except in the growing part of reed and the slow brightening of the mist, and at some point you look up and realize that you have been working for what must be an hour, perhaps more, though it feels like no time at all, and also like an entire day compressed into a single, continuous moment. Your knees are numb against the sack, your hands are numb around the sickle, and your mind is quiet, emptied of everything except the immediate physical present. You are no longer thinking about the cold or the tiredness or the hours ahead. You are simply cutting reed, and the cutting is enough. The thatcher works beside you, and the punt settles lower, and the soft thud of each new bundle joins the whisper of the sickle and the drip of the water, a slow, boring, peaceful music that has no beginning and no end, only the endless, patient repetition of a February morning on the Norfolk Broads. The thatcher straightens his back after a long stretch of cutting, and this time he does not return to the reed bed. Instead, he lays his sickle across the gunwale with a soft, deliberate clink and turns to face the pile of sheaves that now runs nearly the length of the punt, a long, untidy mound of loose stems and trailing plumes that shifts slightly with every motion of the boat. He looks at the pile and then at you, and you understand without words that the first part of the work is done and the second part is about to begin. The sheaves are cut and gathered, but they are not yet finished. They must be bound into proper trusses, compact and tight, each one a neat parcel that can be carried on a shoulder and stacked in the cart and, months from now, laid upon a roof where it will shed rain for 30 winters. You lay your own sickle down, its handle still warm from your grip, and you flex your fingers to bring the blood back into them while the thatcher selects a single reed from the nearest sheaf and holds it up between his thumb and forefinger. He shows you the reed first, turning it so you can see the thickness of the wall, the slight taper, the way the stem is hollow except for the solid nodes at intervals, and then he takes it in both hands and begins to twist. The motion is simple, but not easy. A slow, firm ringing that starts at the middle and works outward. And the reed, which was straight and stiff a moment ago, begins to soften and yield, its fibers separating just enough to become pliable without breaking. He twists until the stem is no longer a stem but a cord, a rough, fibrous rope about the length of his arm, pale gold and surprisingly strong. This is the weave, the bond that will hold the truss together, and he holds it up for you to see before setting it aside on the thwart. Then he takes a sheaf from the pile, a large one that he cut himself, and he kneels on the floorboards with the bundle across his thighs, its butt ends towards his right hand and its plumes flowing over his left knee. You shift on your sack to watch more closely, and the punt rocks softly as your weight adjusts. He gathers the sheaf into a tight cylinder, compressing the hollow stems until they squeak faintly against one another, and then he bends the weave around the bundle, just above the butt ends, crossing the ends over and pulling them hard. The weave bites into the reed, and the sheaf, which was loose and unruly, suddenly becomes a single, solid object, a truss that will not come apart even if dropped or thrown. He ties the ends with a quick, simple knot, a twist and a loop, and a tuck that leaves a short tail, and then he holds the finished truss out for your inspection, turning it so you can see the tightness of the bind, the evenness of the stems, the way the plumes fan out at the top like a golden fountain. The truss is firm and tidy, a thing made well, and it will dry evenly in the shed and remain sound until the day it is needed. You nod, and he places the truss in the bow, the first of many, a small, dense bundle that looks as though it belongs exactly where it is. Now it is your turn, and you pull a sheaf from the pile, a modest one that you cut yourself, and you lay it across your knees in imitation of the master. The dampness of the reed soaks into your woolen hose almost immediately, a cold, fresh wetness that is not unpleasant, and you feel the slight prick of a broken stem end against your palm as you gather the bundle into order. You choose a reed for the width, a long straight one with no visible cracks, and you begin to twist it as he did, but your first attempt is too hasty, and the stem snaps in the middle with a dry, brittle crack that echoes across the water. The thatcher says nothing. He is already twisting his own second width, his hands moving at their own patient pace. You take another reed and try again, this time twisting more slowly, feeling the fibers give way gradually, the stiff tube becoming a limp rope that hangs from your fingers with a slight natural curve. The satisfaction of getting it right is small and quiet, a warmth that has nothing to do with the cold, and you hold the finished width for a moment before laying it across your bundle. Binding the sheaf proves trickier than it looked. You wrap the width around the stems and pull, but the tension is uneven, and the bundle bulges in the middle, the stems sliding against each other and threatening to spill out. You loosen the weave and try again, compressing the bundle more tightly this time, using your knee to press the reed into a compact shape while you work the cord around it. The thatcher glances over but does not intervene. He is binding his own sheaves, his hands moving with the smooth, unhurried certainty of a man who has tied 10,000 such knots, and his silence tells you that you will learn this as you learn the cutting, through repetition, through failure, through the slow, patient instruction of your own hands. On the third attempt the weed holds, biting into the reed and pulling the stems into a tight, even cylinder. And when you tuck the final loop and pull it snug, the truss stays firm. You hold it up, and the thatcher looks at it, and after a moment he gives a single, short nod, an acknowledgement so slight that if you had not been watching for it, you would have missed it entirely. You place the truss beside his in the bow, and the two bundles sit there side by side, one neat and one slightly less neat, but both sound, both dry, both ready for the cart. And then the bundling begins in earnest. The two of you settle onto the damp thwarts, facing each other across the pile, and the morning's rhythm shifts from the whisper of the sickle to the softer, more intermittent sounds of twisting and rapping, and the low, woody creak of compressed reed. You twist withes, one after another, the motion becoming automatic after the first few, your fingers learning the exact pressure required to soften the fibers without breaking them, the precise point at which the stem turns from rigid to flexible. The texture of the reed against your palm is a thing you come to know intimately during this hour, the slight roughness of the outer skin, the cooler smoothness of the inner wall where a leaf sheath has stripped away, the fine papery remnants of the plume that sometimes catch on your sleeve. When a weave is finished, you lay it across your knee and reach for a sheaf, and the sheaf is always different, some thick and some thin, some with butts perfectly aligned, and some with a few stems that have slipped and must be pushed back into place. You gather the bundle, compress it, wrap the withe, pull tight, knot, and lay the finished truss in the growing stack, and then you reach for another sheaf, and the sequence begins again. The thatcher works opposite you, and his presence is a steady, calming thing, a quiet anchor in the grey morning. He does not speak beyond the occasional low murmur, a there when a truss comes out particularly well, an when you find a rhythm and keep it, a that'll do when a bundle is not perfect but still sound, still worthy of the roof. His own hands move without any wasted motion, twisting and wrapping and knotting in a flow that seems to require no thought, and you watch him sometimes between your own bundles, learning from the angle of his wrists, the way he uses his knee to brace the sheaf, the particular tug he gives to seat the knot. Then you return to your own work and the minutes pass, and the stack of trusses grows higher. The mist, which had thinned to a high pale veil, begins to thicken again as you work, closing in around the punt with a slow, silent persistence that reminds you of the Broads' endless patience. One moment you can see the far reed bed, a pale gold wall perhaps 50 feet away. The next moment it is gone, dissolved into vapor, and the world shrinks back to the boat and the water, and the two of you sitting on the thwarts with your bundles. The dampness of the air increases, and droplets form on the gunwale, on the piled trusses, on the shoulders of your mantle, tiny beads of water that catch the diffuse light and hold it for a moment before merging and sliding down. The thatcher pauses once to wipe his face with the back of his hand, a slow wiping motion that clears the moisture from his brow, and you do the same, feeling the cold wetness smear across your cheek and then evaporate into the misty air. Then the mist thins again, just as silently, and the reed bed reappears, and the water stretches out once more in all directions, a sheet of grey silk that merges at the edges with the grey sky. The Broad seems to breathe, inhaling fog and exhaling clarity, over and over, a slow tidal rhythm that has nothing to do with the sea and everything to do with the temperature of the water and the temperature of the air and the patient incomprehensible physics of vapor. You do not think about these things. You simply notice the mist as it comes and goes, a soft, silent companion to the work, as much a part of the bundling as the reed itself. When the mist is thick, the world is small and close and intimate, the sounds of the work muffled and near. When it thins, the world expands, and you feel the vastness of the Broad around you, the miles of water and reed that stretch in every direction, empty and still. Your fingers, which were numb much of the morning, have warmed with the work of bundling, the constant motion of twisting and pulling, bringing the blood back into the tips and restoring sensation. You feel the reed more acutely now, every ridge and node, the slight stickiness of the inner pith where a stem was cut at an angle, the cool, dry smoothness of a weave that has been twisted just right. The pile of unbound sheaves on the floorboards shrinks gradually, and the stack of finished trusses in the bow grows, and you can see the progress in the changing height of the two heaps, a slow, visible measure of the time that has passed. The trusses are neat and uniform, each one a cylinder of golden reed about the thickness of a man's thigh and the length of his arm, bound tightly near the base so that the plumes flare out above the width like a sheaf of arrows. They settle against each other in the stack with soft, dry rustles, and the weight of them presses the punt lower in the water, so that the gunwale now rides only a few inches above the surface, and when you shift your weight, the boat responds with a deeper, more sluggish motion, a reminder of the load you will carry home. The thatcher finishes a truss and places it on the stack, and then he pauses and surveys the remaining sheaves, counting them silently with his eyes. There are perhaps a dozen left, enough for another half-hour of bundling, and he seems satisfied with the calculation. He reaches for the next sheaf, and you do the same, and the rhythm resumes, a quiet, repetitive duet of twisting and wrapping and knotting. The morning has grown older around you without your noticing, the light shifting from pearl to a slightly warmer grey that might mean the sun is higher behind the clouds, or might mean nothing at all, just another subtle gradation in a day, without shadows. You feel a quiet contentment settle over you, a sense of rightness that has nothing to do with achievement, and everything to do with the simple, absorbing act of making something useful with your hands, something that will outlast this day and this winter and perhaps even you, sitting on a roof decades from now while rain runs down its golden stems, and someone else listens to the sound of the weather held at bay. A small sound breaks the rhythm, the distant bubbling call of a coot somewhere out on the water, its voice a peculiar mixture of chuckle and splash that carries through the mist with surprising clarity. The thatcher lifts his head at the sound, and for a moment his hands are still, the half-finished wheel hanging from his fingers. Then the coot falls silent, and he returns to his twisting, and you return to yours, and the sound fades into the memory of the morning, along with 1,000 other small sounds that have marked the day. The punt rocks gently as you both work, a slow, lazy motion that comes from the water rather than from any movement of your own, and the rhythm of the rocking matches the rhythm of your hands, so that the whole world seems to be moving together in a single, patient, boring dance. The last sheaf is smaller than the others, gathered from the thinner reeds at the edge of the bed, and it takes only a short weave to bind it. You twist the final cord with care, feeling the fibers soften under your fingers, and you wrap it around the bundle and pull it tight and knot it, with a tug that seats the bind firmly against the golden stems. You place the finished truss on the top of the stack, and it sits there like the capstone of a small, neat monument, slightly askew at first until you nudge it into place with your palm. Then you sit back on the thwart, and your hands fall into your lap, and for the first time in hours there is no task waiting for them. The thatcher places his own final truss beside yours, and then he too sits back, and the two of you look at the loaded punt in silence. The boat is heavy now, low in the water, its gunwale barely a hand's breadth above the surface, and the stack of trusses fills the bow and amidships in a tidy golden cargo that smells of fresh-cut reed and the cold damp of the marsh. The mist has thinned to a high, even veil that promises no sun but lets through a diffuse, silvery light, and the Broad lies quiet around you, a vast grey mirror broken only by the gentle ripple that spreads from the punt's hull with each small rock. The morning has passed without any mark but the growing stack of bundles, and the afternoon waits ahead, patient and still, as you sit with your tired hands and your quiet heart and the slow, boring satisfaction of work well begun. The thatcher sets his final truss on the stack and then straightens slowly, one hand pressing against the small of his back, in a gesture that speaks of years spent bending over reeds. And when he is upright, he stands for a moment with his head tilted back, taking a long, slow breath that lifts the chest of his fustian coat and then releases it in a pale plume that drifts away across the gunwale. He turns from the stacked cargo and makes his way to the stern, stepping over the thwarts with the automatic care of a man who has walked on moving boats since boyhood. And from a small wooden locker he draws out a cloth bundle tied with a scrap of twine, a leather bottle, and 2 earthenware cups nested together. You watch him set these items on the thwart between you, and the sight of them brings a sudden awareness of your own hunger, a hollow, patient emptiness that has been waiting at the edge of your attention all morning, and now steps forward, quiet but insistent. You had not noticed it while you were cutting, nor while you were binding. But now that the work has paused, the body speaks, and you listen. The cloth, when he unfolds it, reveals a loaf of dark bread and a wedge of hard cheese wrapped in a separate scrap of linen. The cheese pale yellow and slightly crumbly at the edges, where the knife has cut it earlier. There are also 2 small wrinkled apples from the winter store, their skins dull and russeted, and a handful of walnuts still in their shells. The thatcher breaks the bread with his hands, a slow, deliberate tearing that produces 2 rough halves, and he offers one to you on his open palm, the crust dark and floury against his weathered skin. You take it, and the bread is dense and slightly sour. The kind of bread that fills the stomach and stays there, made from rye and barley and whatever the miller had on hand this winter, baked in the village oven 3 days ago, and now chewy and substantial. The cheese has a sharp, nutty flavor that cuts through the sourness of the bread, and when you bite the 2 together, the textures combine into something deeply satisfying, a simple, ancient pleasure that needs no seasoning but hunger. The thatcher eats without haste, his jaws moving in a slow, steady rhythm, his eyes resting on the misty water beyond the punt. He holds his bread in one hand and the cheese in the other, alternating bites, and occasionally he pauses to brush a crumb from his coat or to take a sip from the leather bottle, which he uncorks with his teeth and passes to you without ceremony. The small beer inside is cool and faintly bitter, its fizz long since settled into a flat, smooth drink that tastes of roasted barley and the wooden barrel it was stored in. It wets your mouth and washes down the bread and leaves behind a clean, dry aftertaste that makes the next bite of cheese taste even sharper. You drink slowly, letting the liquid sit in your mouth before swallowing, and the cold of it spreads down your throat and into your chest, a cool counterpoint to the dull warmth that the walking and cutting built in your muscles. When you pass the bottle back, the thatcher takes a long swallow and then sets it aside, and you both return to your food in the quiet, companionable silence of 2 people who have shared bread on a boat many times before. You crack the walnuts with the flat of your sickle, a careful tap that splits the shell along its seam, and you pick out the nut meat with the tip of your knife, the kernels sweet and oily and slightly bitter at the center. The thatcher does the same, and the small, sharp sounds of cracking shells punctuate the softer sounds of chewing and swallowing, a quiet, intermittent percussion that carries no further than the gunwales. The apples, when you come to them, are cool and firm, their flesh crisp and juicy, in a way that surprises you after the dry bread and the dense cheese, and you eat yours down to the core, spitting the pips into your palm and then tossing them over the side, where they float for a moment on the amber water, before sinking slowly into the dark. The thatcher eats his apple more slowly, turning it in his hand after each bite, and when he reaches the core he examines it for a moment, as if reading something in the seeds, and then he tosses it gently into the water, where it lands with a soft, solitary plop. The meal ends without any signal, simply a gradual cessation of eating and a settling back onto the thwarts, the cloth folded and the bottle stoppered and the cups nested and returned to their locker. You sit with your hands in your lap, your stomach full and warm, and you feel the tiredness of the morning settle over you like a second blanket, a gentle, diffuse weariness that is not unpleasant, but rather comforting, a reminder that your body has worked and will work again. The cold that you had been holding at bay through movement begins to creep back, now that you are still, touching your cheeks and the tips of your ears and the knuckles of your resting hands, and you pull your hood a little closer and cross your arms over your chest, conserving the warmth of the meal inside your layers of wool. The thatcher does the same, hunching his shoulders slightly and settling his back against the stern thwart, and for a long while neither of you speaks, neither of you moves. In the quiet, the marsh begins to speak. You hear it first as a gradual awareness, a slow dawning of sound that had been there all along but hidden beneath the noises of the work, the crunch of the sickle and the rustle of the reed and the thud of the bundles. Now, with your hands still and your breath slow, the sounds of the Broad rise up and make themselves known one by one, a quiet, patient orchestra that has been playing to an empty hall all morning and is only now noticed. The water laps against the side of the punt with a soft, rhythmic kiss, a liquid sound that is not quite a splash and not quite a gurgle, something in between, a small wet pulse that comes and goes with the shifting of the boat. It is a sound so quiet that you might miss it if you were not listening, but once you hear it you cannot stop hearing it, and it becomes the foundation, the low, steady note upon which all the other sounds are built. Reed buntings call from somewhere in the bed behind you, their short metallic notes like 2 pebbles tapped together, repeated at irregular intervals with long silences in between. You cannot see the birds, but you can picture them. Small brown shapes clinging to the reed stems with their tiny feet, puffing out their feathers against the cold and watching the punt with black, unblinking eyes. Somewhere farther off, a coot makes its strange, bubbling cry, a sound that is half chuckle and half splash, as if the bird is laughing at a joke that only waterfowl understand, and then another coot answers from across the broad, and the two of them hold a brief, absurd conversation that fades into silence as suddenly as it began. The coots are invisible in the mist, but their voices carry with a clarity that belies the distance, and you feel the presence of the birds as a comfort, a reminder that the brood is not empty but inhabited, full of small hidden lives going about their own quiet business. A reed warbler, overwintering here though most of its kind have gone south, lets out a soft, chattering trill from deep within the phragmites, a sound that is less a song than a series of ticking notes, like water dripping onto dry leaves. It sings for a few seconds and then falls quiet, and the silence that follows is deeper for having been broken. A heron, somewhere you cannot see, gives a single harsh croak that echoes across the water, and then fades, and you imagine the great grey bird standing motionless at the edge of the reed bed, 1 foot drawn up, its long neck folded into an S-curve, waiting for a fish that may or may not come. The heron is patient in a way that even the thatcher might admire, a living statue that can stand for hours without moving, and its single call is the only sign it will give of its presence all day. The mist carries these sounds oddly, muffling some and sharpening others, so that a bird 100 yards away might seem to be just beyond the gunwale, while a bird close by might be half swallowed by vapor. The effect is unsettling at first, but then soothing, a gentle dislocation that makes the world seem larger and smaller at the same time, a place where distance is measured not in feet, but in the clarity of a call. You sit and listen, and the sounds wash over you without demanding anything, a quiet, ambient music that fills the pause between one part of the day and the next. The thatcher listens too. You can tell by the stillness of his head, the slight tilt of his ear towards the reed bed, and you know that he is hearing things you cannot hear, the subtle variations in the birdsong that tell him about the weather and the water and the health of the marsh. He has lived here so long that the sounds are as legible to him as a book, and he reads them now with the same patient attention he gave to the reed beds this morning. A dragonfly nymph, overwintering in the mud at the bottom of the broad, rises to the surface and emerges from its larval case, a slow, invisible process happening somewhere beneath the amber water, and though you cannot see it, you can sense the hidden life of the fen going on all around you, the slow metabolism of the marsh that never truly stops, even in February. Bubbles of marsh gas rise from the deep peat and break the surface with tiny, silent pops, releasing a faint earthy smell that mingles with the clean scent of the water and the lingering aroma of the bread and cheese. A school of tiny fish, roach or rudd perhaps, dimples the surface a few feet from the punt, a brief, silvery flicker that is gone before you can focus on it, leaving only a spreading ring of ripples that travels outward until it meets the hull and is absorbed. Your own body makes sounds too, sounds that you would never notice in the village but that are amplified here on the still water. The soft, regular whisper of your breath, the faint creak of your leather waistcoat when you shift your weight, the gurgle of your stomach settling around the meal. These sounds are not embarrassing. They are simply part of the quiet human notes in the marsh's symphony, no more remarkable than the coot's chuckle or the lapping of the water. The thatcher's breath is slower than yours, deeper, the breath of a man whose lungs have been shaped by decades of damp air and steady labor, and you can hear it as a low, rhythmic undertone that reassures you of his presence even when you are not looking at him. Your fingers, which had been cold and then numb and then warmed by the bundling, now begin to cool again as you sit, and you rub them together slowly, palm against palm, feeling the friction generate a small temporary heat that fades as soon as you stop. The sensation returns to them in stages, a prickling tingle that is not quite painful, more like a gentle reminder that the flesh is still alive and still connected to the body. You flex each finger in turn, watching them curl and straighten, and the joints move with a slight stiffness that will loosen once you begin working again. The thatcher watches your hands with a brief sidelong glance, and then he pulls his own hands from his sleeves and flexes them too, an unconscious mirroring that makes the corner of your mouth twitch upward. The light has changed while you have been sitting, not brightening but shifting in quality, the grey becoming a shade warmer, a hint of ochre buried deep within the pearl that suggests the sun is high overhead, behind the cloud, unseen but present. The mist responds to this change by thinning again, retreating in slow, silent folds until you can see almost to the far side of the Broad, where a line of alders stands black and skeletal against the pale sky, their bare branches tracing intricate patterns that look like cracks in the grey. The water, now visible for several hundred feet, shimmers faintly as a breath of air moves across it, a breeze so light that it barely ruffles the surface, just enough to break the perfect mirror into a million tiny facets that catch the diffuse light and scatter it. The punt rocks a little more in response to this breeze, a slow, sleepy sway that is almost hypnotic, and you feel your eyelids grow heavy for a moment before you blink and rouse yourself. The thatcher shifts on his thwart, and the movement draws your attention. He is looking out across the water with the same calm, appraising gaze he has worn all morning. But there is something different in his posture now, a slight forward lean that suggests the pause is coming to its natural end. He does not speak. He simply turns his head and meets your eyes, and the look he gives you is patient but expectant. A quiet acknowledgement that the meal is done and the rest is done and the marsh has said what it has to say. He reaches for his sickle, and the blade catches the light with a soft grey gleam, and you feel your own body begin to stir in response, the tiredness receding just enough to make room for the next task. Your hands close around your own sickle, the handle still cool and smooth, and you rise from the thwart, your knees aching dully as you shift your weight, your stomach full and your mind quiet, the sounds of the marsh still ringing faintly in your ears as the punt drifts slowly towards the next reed bed, the afternoon waiting patiently ahead. The thatcher does not start cutting again immediately. Instead, he stands in the stern with his sickle resting across his thigh, his eyes moving slowly over the reed beds that fringe this part of the Broad, and you can see him making calculations, measuring the height of the stems and the thickness of the growth and the distance from the water's edge to the open channel where the punt will need to turn when the time comes to leave. His gaze lingers on a patch of phragmites that stands a little apart from the main bed, a dense stand growing on a slight rise of peat where the water is shallower and the stems have reached up taller than any you have cut today, their plumes thick and full and their colour a deep, rich gold that seems to hold the light even in the grey afternoon. He nods towards it, a small single inclination of his chin, and you understand that this will be the last cutting of the day, the final sheaves to fill the punt before the tide turns and the journey home begins. You take up your sickle and move to the side of the boat, and the thatcher settles himself on the centre thwart with a short curved blade and begins trimming the butts of the morning's bundles, evening up the ends where your novice cuts left them a little ragged, his hands moving with the same patient rhythm they have held all day. You are cutting on your own now, and the feeling is different. The thatcher is present but busy, his attention on the bundles and not on your stroke, and the responsibility of the work settles onto your shoulders with a quiet, agreeable weight. You lean out over the gunwale towards the tall reed, and the punt tips slightly under your weight, the water rising almost to the tarred edge before the boat finds its balance and holds. The first stem you choose is thicker than any you have cut before, its base nearly as wide as your thumb, and when you set the sickle against it you can feel the difference in the resistance, the extra density of fibre that has grown through a long summer and cured through a hard winter. You draw the blade across with a firmer stroke, and the stem parts with a deep, satisfying crunch that travels up through the handle and into your wrist, a sound that speaks of strength and sharpness, and the clean, simple physics of a curved edge meeting a hollow tube. The reed topples slowly, and you catch it before it can hit the water, adding a second stem and a third. Your left arm, learning to manage the increased weight of the thicker growth, your hand adjusting its grip on the bundle as it swells. The afternoon has brought a change in the light, a subtle warming of the grey that does not become sun but loses its earlier flatness, taking on a diffuse, milky brightness that seems to come from everywhere at once. The mist, which has been rising and falling all day, now settles into a high, thin ceiling that hangs perhaps 20 feet above the water, a layer of vapor so fine that it is more a whitening of the air than a true fog. Below this ceiling the visibility is good, 100 feet or more, and you can see the details of the reed bed that were hidden before, the way the stems grow in clumps of 5 or 6 from a single rhizome, the way the old, broken stubs from last year's cutting poke up among the new growth like grey teeth, the way a spider has spun a small tattered web between 2 stems that now holds a dozen tiny droplets of condensed mist, each one a perfect trembling sphere. These observations come to you not as thoughts but as impressions, quiet registrations that pass through your mind while your hands continue their work. The sickle moving and the reed gathering and the bundles growing. Your arm begins to ache after a while, a dull, spreading tiredness that starts in the wrist, where the constant gripping of the sickle has worked the tendons and climbs slowly up into the forearm and the shoulder. It is not a sharp pain, but a warm, heavy sensation, a reminder that your body has been working since before dawn and will be glad when the day is done. You pause to rest, laying the sickle across the gunwale and flexing your fingers, and the thatcher glances up from his trimming with a look that is not concern, but simple awareness, the look of a man who knows exactly how a novice's arm feels at this hour, and knows also that the arm will strengthen, and the task will become easier with each passing season. You meet his eyes and give a small nod, and he returns to his work, and after a moment you return to yours, the sickle fitting back into your hand, as though it has been waiting for you. The reed here is finer than the morning's growth, not only taller, but straighter, the stems running up without any of the slight curves or kinks that the outer edges of the bed sometimes produce, and cutting it is a pleasure of its own quiet kind. The blade passes through each stem with a clean, crisp sound, a sound you have come to recognize as the mark of good reed that will lie flat on a roof and shed water without rotting, reed that a thatcher would choose over all others. You find yourself cutting more slowly now, not from tiredness, but from a kind of attention, a careful, deliberate quality that has entered your movements as the day has worn on, replacing the slight haste of the morning with something more measured, more thoughtful. Each stem is chosen with a glance. Each cut is placed just above the waterline. Each bundle is gathered with care so that the butts align and the plumes trail evenly, and when you lay a sheaf across the resting pole, it sits neatly among the others, a small, satisfying addition to the day's harvest. A water beetle crawls onto a floating reed stem near the gunwale, its body a dark, glossy oval that catches the pale light, its legs moving with a slow, deliberate tread that seems to belong to a creature with nowhere to go and no hurry to get there. You pause in your cutting to watch it, the sickle held motionless above the water, and the beetle reaches the end of the stem and stops, its antennae waving gently, as though tasting the air. Then it turns and crawls back the way it came, and you feel a small, quiet kinship with it, a creature going about its small, necessary business on a grey February afternoon, asking nothing of the world but a reed to walk on. The thatcher does not notice the beetle. He is absorbed in his trimming, the short blade making neat, slicing cuts that square off the butts of the bundles, and the small mountain of trimmed stems beside him grows slowly as he works. The quiet of the afternoon is different from the quiet of the morning, a deeper, more settled silence that has absorbed the bird song and the breeze and the lap of the water into itself, so that these sounds no longer stand out, but blend together into a single, continuous texture. The reed bed rustles occasionally when a breath of air moves through it, a soft, dry sound like paper being shuffled very far away, and the water taps gently against the hull, and the sickle whispers through the stems, and all of these sounds together form a kind of silence in themselves, a peaceful, boring backdrop that asks nothing of your attention but holds it anyway, gently, without demand. You are aware of your own breathing, slow and even, and of the beat of your heart, steady and calm, and of the slight, pleasant ache in your muscles, and these awarenesses are not separate things but part of the whole, woven into the fabric of the afternoon like the spider's web among the reeds. The tide begins to turn. You do not know it at first because the Broad is inland and the sea is miles away at Great Yarmouth, and the connection between them is a slow, winding river that takes hours to feel the pull of the distant ocean. But the thatcher knows, He lifts his head from his trimming and looks at the water, and you follow his gaze and see it too. A subtle change in the surface, a slight, silvery movement that was not there before, as if the Broad has taken a quiet, shallow breath. The current, which has been almost imperceptible all day, a gentle drift towards the river mouth, now pauses and begins to move the other way. A slow, creeping flow that pushes back into the Broad from the channels that connect it to the sea. It is not dramatic, not a wave or a rush, just a change in the texture of the water, a faint silken sheen that slides across the surface and then is still again. The punt responds with a gentle, almost imperceptible rock, a slight sway that is different from the wind-driven motion of the morning, and the boat settles into a new angle, its bow pointing a little more towards the reed bed, as if the water itself is nudging you to finish your work. You look at the thatcher and he nods once, a confirmation that you have read the water correctly. The tide is a clock that the marsh obeys, a slow, saline pulse that reaches up from the sea twice a day and then retreats, and the reed cutters have always timed their days to its rhythm, launching the punt on the ebb and returning on the flood, letting the water carry them home. The turning of the tide means that the day is entering its final phase, and you feel a small, quiet urgency stir in your chest, not anxiety, but awareness, a knowledge that the last sheaves must be cut soon, and the punt pulled back before the current makes the work difficult. You return to the reed with a renewed steadiness, the sickle moving a little faster now, the bundles growing a little thicker, and the thatcher finishes his trimming and begins to gather the loose stems into a pile, ready to be bound. The thick reed yields to your blade in a steady succession, each cut a small, clean punctuation mark, each bundle a sentence completed. You work your way along the edge of the bed, moving the punt with a paddle when you need to reach a fresh patch, and the pile of sheaves on the floorboards rises higher. Your arm no longer aches. It has moved beyond aching into a state of simple, mechanical endurance, a rhythm that carries itself forward without requiring conscious effort. You could cut reed forever, you think, or at least until the light fades and the thought does not trouble you. It is simply a fact, a recognition that the work has become a part of you for this afternoon, as natural as breathing. The thatcher, watching you from the stern, sees the change in your movements, the smoother stroke and the surer gathering, and he says nothing, but his silence is a different silence now. A silence that holds a quiet, understated approval. The last stem falls, and you gather it into the final sheaf with a sense of completion that is entirely without ceremony. A simple, quiet closing of the loop. You lay the sheaf on the pile and straighten your back, your spine cracking softly in two places, a sound that is more relief than complaint, and you look out over the Broad. The mist is still there, high and thin, and the water is still there, grey and calm, and the reed beds are still there, vast and patient, and nothing has changed except the boat, which now rides so low that the water is only inches from the gunwale, and the pile of reed which now fills the punt from bow to stern, a golden, fragrant cargo that represents the labour of a full day. The thatcher rises from his thwart and stows his trimming knife, and then he looks at you with a gaze that holds everything that needs to be said. The day is done, the work is good, the tide is turning, and it is time to go home. You nod, and you pick up the paddle, and the punt begins its slow, heavy turn towards the channel that will lead you back to the stave, back to the cottage, back to the fire that waits in the hearth, the afternoon settling around you like a soft grey blanket as the Broad releases you into the evening. The thatcher takes up the quant pole from where it has lain along the gunwale all afternoon, its ash shaft beaded with condensation that wets his palm as he grips it, and he steps to the stern with the same quiet, automatic ease with which he has done everything today, his boots finding their familiar places on the worn floorboards without any need for looking. You settle yourself on the cushion of cut reed in the bow, a thick, springy mattress of bound trusses that shifts under your weight and then accepts you, moulding to the shape of your back and your bent knees, and the smell of the fresh reed rises around you with an intensity that is almost sweet, the concentrated essence of the day's labour now become your seat. The punt lies so low in the water that the surface is only a few inches below the gunwale, a dark, glossy sheet that trembles with every breath of air, and the weight of the cargo makes the boat feel different under you, slower and more settled, as though it has grown roots into the Broad and must be persuaded to leave. The thatcher sets the brass ferrule of the pole against the staith-side mud and pushes, and the punt stirs from its resting place with a soft, reluctant suck, the water clinging to the hull for a moment before releasing it into the channel. The narrow cut receives you like a corridor of reeds, its walls of phragmites rising tall on either side and arching inward to form a loose, rustling ceiling through which the grey sky shows only in fragments, pale and distant. The channel twists and turns through the reed bed, following some logic of peat depth and water flow that was old before the first thatcher ever poled a punt here, and the thatcher steers through it with small, precise movements of the pole, nudging the stern left or right, feathering the blade against the mud to slow or to speed the boat. His shoulders move under the fustian coat with a steady, rhythmic roll, the same motion repeated over and over, push and lift and drip and push again, and the punt slides forward through the reeds with a soft, continuous shushing that is the dominant sound of the journey, a whisper of stems against tarred wood that never quite ceases. You sit in the bow with your hands resting on a bundle, your body tired in a way that feels complete rather than depleted, and you watch the reed bed slide past at the pace of a slow walk, each stem appearing at the edge of your vision and then falling behind, lost among 1,000 identical stems, a gentle, hypnotic procession that asks nothing of you but your attention. The mist has thickened again now that you are off the open broad, gathering in the narrow cuts where the air is sheltered from whatever faint currents move over the water, and it hangs between the reed walls in soft, drifting curtains that part as the punt approaches and close again behind you. Erasing the way you have come, you can see no more than a boat's length ahead or behind. The world is reduced to the small, moving bubble of the punt. The reed, the water, the man at the stern, and the slow, single moment of the journey. The cold, which had retreated a little during the work, returns now with a patient, persistent grip, seeping up through the piled reed and into your thighs and your lower back, a damp, earthy cold that seems to rise directly from the water beneath the hull. You pull your hood closer around your face, and the wool, stiff with dried moisture, scratches gently against your chin, a sensation so familiar by now that it has become a comfort, a steady, tactile anchor in the drifting grey. The pole pushes and lifts, each cycle exactly like the one before it except for the small variations that you have learned to notice. The deeper thunk when the mud is soft, the sharper clink when the ferrule strikes a buried stone, the longer glide when the current is with you, and the shorter push when it is not. The thatcher's breathing is slow and even, audible now in the quiet of the narrow cut, a low, rhythmic counterpoint to the sound of the pole and the rustle of the reeds, and it reminds you of the breathing of the cottage at night. The slow rise and fall of a chest that has laboured all day and will labour again tomorrow. He does not speak, and neither do you. The journey home is a silent pact between you, a shared understanding that words would only disturb the quiet closing of the day, the gradual unwinding of the hours that have passed since you stepped out of the cottage into the dark. An alder appears on the left bank, the first tree you have seen since morning, its bare branches stretching out over the water like dark, twisted fingers, and it marks the place where the cut meets the higher ground, the edge of the true marsh. You know this tree, a landmark on the way home, its trunk split by lightning years before you were born, its bark black and deeply furrowed, and the sight of it settles something in your chest, a small, quiet confirmation that you are on the right path, and the stave is not far now. The thatcher guides the punt around the alder's exposed roots, which reach into the water like a cage of knuckles, and the boat responds with a slow, graceful curve that brings you into a wider stretch of the cut, where the reeds fall away and the banks open out to reveal the first dark skeletons of winter hedgerows, the bare hawthorn and hazel standing in the mist, like charcoal drawings. The light has begun to fade, not dimming exactly, but losing its silvery quality, taking on a pearl-grey depth that speaks of the afternoon's end and the long, slow approach of dusk, and the world seems to hold its breath, waiting for the night. A heron stands at the edge of the water, so still and so grey that at first you mistake it for a piece of driftwood lodged against the bank, and it is only when the punt draws closer that you see the long curved neck, the folded wings, the single leg drawn up into the breast feathers, the eye like a chip of yellow glass that watches you without blinking. The bird does not move as you pass, does not so much as turn its head, and its stillness is so complete that it seems to belong to a different order of time. a time that moves at the pace of the tide and the seasons, rather than the hours. You hold your own breath as the punt glides by, not wanting to disturb the heron, not wanting to break the spell of its perfect, patient composure, and the thatcher, as if reading your thoughts, lets the pole trail in the water for a moment, reducing the boat's speed to a bare drift. Then the heron is behind you, swallowed by the mist, and the pole resumes its rhythm, and the cut continues its slow, winding course towards the Staithe. The water in this part of the cut is darker, stained by the peat it has filtered through and shaded by the overhanging trees, and it reflects the grey sky only in patches where the surface is unbroken by the small, swirling eddies of the pole's passage. A few dead leaves, blown in from the alders months ago, float on the surface like tiny waterlogged boats, their veins standing out in delicate skeletal relief, and they spin slowly as the punt pushes past, caught in the gentle turbulence that trails behind the stern. You watch one leaf in particular, a brown oak leaf that has somehow found its way here from a tree far inland, and you follow its slow, aimless rotation until it disappears into the shadow of the bank, a small, quiet mystery that you will never solve. Then your attention drifts back to the thatcher, who had shifted his grip on the pole, his hands moving up the shaft in a slow climbing motion as he pushes, and the sureness of his movements is a thing you have come to admire without ever putting it into words, a craft so deeply learned that it has become as natural as walking. The cut narrows again, pinching between two high banks of clay and root, and the punt scrapes gently against a submerged branch that rolls along the hull with a dull wooden thump before sinking back into the depths. The thatcher eases the boat through the tight spot with a series of short, careful strokes, the pole working not as a pushing tool now, but as a lever, nudging the bow first left and then right, and you feel each adjustment through the reed beneath you, a faint, transmitted tremor that tells you about the shape of the channel bottom and the obstacles hidden below the surface. The air here is cooler, a pocket of still, damp cold that has been trapped by the high banks all day, and your breath plumes in front of you in thick, slow clouds that merge with the mist and are indistinguishable from it. You smell wet earth, a clean, mineral scent that is different from the peaty smell of the Broad, and beneath it a faint hint of wood smoke, the first sign that you are approaching the village, that somewhere ahead a hearth is burning and a kettle is waiting. The cut opens out again, and now you can see the Staithe ahead, a dark, low shape that resolves gradually out of the mist as the punt approaches, its planks black with moisture and its iron ring glinting dully in the fading light. The sight of it brings no rush of relief, no surge of impatience, only a quiet, slow recognition that the water journey is ending, that the boat will soon be tied and the reed unloaded and the long walk back to the cottage begun. The thatcher poles on with the same steady rhythm, not quickening his pace even though the Staithe is in view, because haste has no place here, because the journey is not complete until the punt is safely alongside the landing and the rope is made fast to the ring. You watch the Staithe grow larger, its details becoming clearer as you drift towards it, the worn steps cut into the bank, the old post with its carved bird shape, the small puddle of water that has collected in a hollow of the planking and now reflects the grey sky with a perfect, miniature fidelity. You feel the punt begin to slow as the thatcher reverses his stroke, dragging the pole through the water to check the boat's momentum. And then there is a soft, muffled bump as the hull kisses the stave's edge, a sound so gentle it is more a touch than a collision, and the boat settles against the landing with a final, quiet sigh. The pole is laid along the gunwale, the rope is lifted from its coil, and the thatcher steps onto the Staithe with a single, easy motion, leaving you in the bow among the piled reed, the day's labour resting all around you, the mist closing in soft and grey as the afternoon slips towards evening, and the cottage hearth waits somewhere ahead in the quiet. The thatcher's boots make a solid, steady sound on the wet planks of the Staithe as he moves along the landing, the rope trailing from his hand in a loose, dripping coil that leaves a dark trail of water spots on the wood, and when he reaches the iron ring he kneels with a slow, deliberate bend of his knees and passes the rope through the ring twice, before tying it off with a knot that looks simple but will hold against any current. The punt, now secured, nudges gently against the Staithe with each small ripple that runs up the cut, a soft, rhythmic bumping that is the boat's only comment on being home. You rise from your nested trusses in the bow, your legs stiff and slow to answer after the long sitting, and the blood returns to your feet in a prickling, tingling rush that makes you plant each step carefully on the shifting floorboards as you make your way to the side. The thatcher reaches out a hand, not to pull you up, but to offer a steady point, and you grip his wrist and step onto the staith with a single, ungraceful lurch that becomes steady the moment your boots meet the solid, unmoving earth of the landing. The ground under you feels strange after so many hours on the water, too firm, too still, as though the land itself has forgotten how to move and has become a foreign thing, a surface that does not breathe or sway or respond to the shifting of weight. You stand for a moment getting your land legs back while the thatcher begins the work of unloading, lifting the first truss from the stack and hoisting it onto his shoulder with a smooth, practiced motion that speaks of decades of repetition, the golden bundle riding high against his neck and the width pressing into the wool of his coat without leaving a mark. He carries the truss up the bank, his feet finding the worn steps without a glance, and you hear the soft, heavy thump as he lays it on the ground at the top. And then he is coming back down for another, his face calm and his breathing unchanged. You bend and lift your own first truss, the reed surprisingly light after a day of handling it, the bound stems firm and tidy under your arm, and you follow him up the slope with the careful tread of someone who is tired in a deep, satisfied way and does not wish to stumble at the last. The bank is slippery with the day's damp, the mud slicked to a dark, glossy paste that tries to pull your boot off at each step, but the root-ribbed steps give enough purchase to climb safely, and you reach the top and lay your truss beside the thatchers on the flat grassy verge where the track begins. A low-slung cart waits there, the same cart that brought you here on your first morning as apprentice, its wheels sunk slightly into the soft ground and its shafts resting on a block of wood, and the old horse that pulls it stands in the traces with the infinite patience of an animal that has spent its life waiting and will spend the rest of it waiting too, its breath steaming gently in the cooling air and its eyes half closed against the mist. You add your truss to the cart bed, where it lands with a soft, rustling thump, and then you turn and walk back down the bank for another, passing the thatcher on his way up, the two of you moving in a slow, alternating rhythm that is the last rhythm of the day, the final quiet labor before the rest. The unloading takes less time than you expect, the stack of trusses in the punt shrinking steadily as you carry them up the bank one by one, and with each trip the boat rises a little higher in the water, losing its deep settled heaviness and beginning to bob more freely against the staith, as if it is waking from the day's work and remembering its own lightness. When the last truss is lifted from the floorboards, the punt is nearly empty, only the sickles and the sacking and the folded basket remaining, and you gather these up while the thatcher does a last check of the boat, his eyes scanning the bilges for any forgotten tool or stray piece of width. He finds nothing but a few loose reed stems that he tosses into the water, where they float away with the slow, aimless drift of things that have completed their purpose, and then he unties the bailer from its place and tips a small amount of brown water over the side before returning it to the locker. The punt is ready for tomorrow, for the next morning and the next cutting and the next load of reed, and it waits at the staith with the patience of all well-made things, dark and tarred and silent in the fading afternoon. You shoulder the bundle of tools and follow the thatcher up the bank for the last time, and at the top you stop and look back at the cut, the dark, narrow ribbon of water that leads back to the Broad and the reed beds and the long grey hours of the day. The mist has thickened again with the approach of evening, and the water is already losing itself in vapour, the state and the punt and the far bank all dissolving into a soft grey unity that will hold through the night and into the next morning, when you will return and find everything as you left it, the boat and the water and the patient waiting reeds. Then you turn and walk to the cart, where the thatcher is already arranging the trusses in neat, interlocking layers, building a load that will not shift on the journey home, and you add your own bundle to the stack, and then climb onto the back of the cart, sitting on the piled reed with your legs dangling over the edge, the tools in your lap and your hood pulled close against the cooling air. The cart moves off with a lurch that becomes a slow, steady sway, the old horse finding its own pace without any urging from the thatcher, who walks at its head with one hand resting on the bridle, his boots squelching softly in the mud of the track. The lane unwinds in reverse now, the same landmarks that you passed in the morning darkness reappearing in the grey dusk, with a different, softer aspect. The split oak and the stone waymarker and the plank bridge, all familiar but changed. Their shapes blurred by the mist and the fading light, and your own tired, quiet mind. The village is stirring as you approach, the sounds of it reaching you through the fog one by one. A dog barking somewhere far off, a woman calling a child in from the cold, the distant, rhythmic thump of an axe splitting firewood. And these sounds are a comfort, a quiet welcome back to the world of people and hearths and walls. You pass the well and the deserted byre and the first sleeping cottage with its thread of chimney smoke, and the cartwheels rumble over the frozen ruts with a low wooden groan that seems to belong to the evening itself. The thatcher's yard is a small, quiet space enclosed by a low wall of flint and brick, and the cart fits through the gate with only inches to spare, the horse knowing the width exactly and stepping through without hesitation. The open-sided shed stands at the far end of the yard, its roof a patchwork of old reed thatch that the master laid himself many years ago, now weathered to a deep silver grey that is the colour of the winter sky, and it is here that the trusses will be stacked to cure, laid in alternating rows that allow the air to circulate and finish the drying that the frost began. You slide down from the cart and your boots hit the packed earth of the yard with a solid, final thump. And then you are unloading again, carrying the trusses from the cart to the shed, while the thatcher stacks them with the careful, precise eye of a man who knows that good reed can be ruined by careless storage, that the roof of some future cottage depends on the way the bumbles are arranged tonight. You hand him the trusses and he places them, one by one, butt ends outward and plumes inward, each layer set at a right angle to the one below, so that the air can move freely through the stack and the pile grows steadily in the dim, sheltered space of the shed. A great, fragrant store of golden reed that will last through the spring and into the summer. Enough for a roof, or perhaps two, depending on the size of the job and the height of the pitch. The thatcher works in silence, his hands moving with the same patient, unhurried rhythm they have held all day. And when the last truss is placed and the stack is complete, he steps back and surveys it with a long, slow look, his eyes checking the alignment of the rows and the stability of the pile. And then he gives a single, short nod, a full stop to the day's labour. The cart is empty now, and the horse is led to its small stable, with a pat on the neck and a bucket of water drawn from the yard pump, the iron handle screeching once and then falling into its steady, rhythmic clank as the water gushes out, cold and clear, into the wooden pail. You pump while the thatcher holds the bucket, and then you carry it to the stable while he fetches a measure of oats from the bin, and the horse eats and drinks in the quiet, warm darkness of its stall, its great, soft muzzle dipping into the bucket, and then lifting, water dripping from its whiskers, its breath a steady, peaceful sound that fills the small space. You leave the stable door on the latch and cross the yard to the cottage, where the thatcher is already at the door, his hand on the latch, his silhouette dark against the faint orange glow that seeps through the shutters from the hearth within. The cottage receives you with an embrace of warmth that is almost shocking after the long, cold hours on the water, a dry, smoky heat that wraps around your face and your hands and seeps through the layers of wool and leather, finding the chilled skin beneath and beginning to warm it. The fire has been banked all day, but the peat has burned slowly and steadily in its absence, and the embers still glow a deep, pulsing red beneath the fine white ash, ready to be stirred back to life. The thatcher kneels at the hearth and does this now, using the iron poker to break the ash crust and expose the embers, then adding a few small dry sticks of hazel that catch almost at once, their flames springing up with a bright, crackling eagerness that fills the room with dancing light. He sets the kettle on its trivet over the growing flames, and the iron pot, black with soot and smooth with age, begins its low, steady hum that will build slowly over the next hour until it reaches a full, rolling boil. You shed your outer layers one by one, hanging the damp mantle on its peg and the leather waistcoat beside it, and your shoulders feel light and strange without the weight of the day's clothing pulling on them, as though you are shedding not just wool and leather, but the hours themselves, letting them fall away into the corner of the room where they can rest until tomorrow. Your boots come off with a tug, and you set them by the hearth to dry. the clay on their soles already cracking in the warmth, and then you pull the stool close to the fire and sit down with your stockinged feet stretched towards the flames, the heat beginning to work its way into your toes with a slow, gentle insistence that is almost painful, but not quite, the ache of returning sensation that you have felt 100 times before and will feel 100 times again. The thatcher settles into his chair, a high-backed wooden seat with a cushion of old reed that has been sat on for so many years it has moulded to the shape of his body, and he leans back with a long, slow exhalation that seems to carry the whole day out of him, releasing it into the warm, smoky air of the cottage, where it dissipates and is gone. He does not speak, and neither do you. The quiet that fills the room is not the quiet of the Broad, but a different quiet, a domestic, enclosed silence that is broken by the crackle of the fire and the hum of the kettle and the occasional soft, settling creak of the cottage timbers as they adjust to the warmth. You sit and listen to these sounds, and the tiredness that has been building all day settles over you with a deep, gentle weight, a tiredness that is not exhaustion, but completion, the feeling of a day fully lived and the task fully lived. The kettle begins to sing, a thin, high note that grows in volume until the thatcher reaches forward and lifts it from the trivet, pouring the steaming water into 2 earthenware mugs that he has set on the hearthstones. Into each mug he drops a pinch of dried herbs from a jar on the mantel, chamomile and mint, and something else you cannot name, and the scent that rises with the steam is clean and green and soothing, a smell that seems to belong to sleep itself. He hands you 1 mug, and the warmth of it seeps into your palms through the thick, unglazed clay, a gentle, penetrating heat that travels up your wrists and into your arms, and you lift it to your face and breathe in the steam before taking a slow, careful sip that scalds your lip just slightly, enough to remind you that you are alive and warm and safe. The thatcher drinks his own tea in the same slow, contemplative way he does everything, his eyes half closed, his face in the firelight soft and unguarded, and the 2 of you sit together in the quiet, drinking and listening to the fire and waiting for nothing at all. Outside the window the February dark has returned, not the charcoal dark of the early morning, but the full, deep dark of a winter night, a darkness that presses against the shutters with a soft, patient weight, held back by the thin walls and the warm hearth and the simple, sturdy fact of the cottage. The mist is still there, you know, filling the lanes and the cuts and the Broad, wrapping the empty punt and the silent reed beds in its grey silent embrace, and it will be there tomorrow when you rise and walk down the track again, and the day after that, and the day after that, and the day after that, for as long as February lasts and the reed needs cutting. But tonight you are here, and the fire is warm and the tea is hot, and your body is heavy with the good, honest tiredness of work, a tiredness that will carry you down into sleep like the punt drifting on the Broad, slow and quiet and deep. The thatcher sets his empty mug on the hearthstones and leans back in his chair, his eyes closing fully now, his hands resting on his thighs with the palms turned upward, and within a few moments his breathing has slowed into the deep, even rhythm of a man who has worked all day and will work again tomorrow, but for now has let go of everything, given himself over to the warmth and the quiet and the long, slow pull of rest. You finish your own tea and set the mug beside his, and then you sit for a while longer, watching the fire burn down to embers, the flames shrinking from bright yellow to deep orange to a soft, pulsing glow that is the color of the peat itself. The room grows dimmer and dimmer, the shadows reaching out from the corners and claiming the table and the bench and the hanging bunches of herbs, and the only light left is the low, red heartbeat of the hearth, a light that will last until morning if left alone. Somewhere in the village an owl calls, a low, soft hoot that carries through the mist and the dark and the quiet, and you listen to it as you rise from the stool and make your way to the small, cold room where your bed waits. The blankets folded back and the pillow smooth, the day complete, the reeds stacked, the Broad silent, and sleep coming towards you like a slow grey tide, patient and full of rest,